My fiancée set up a trust exercise, where I had to endure her ex-boyfriend mocking me at a restaurant for 90 minutes while she laughed along, then told me, "You earned my respect." I said nothing, paid the bill, and walked out. What Veronica didn't know was that I'd discovered their 6-month affair weeks earlier and had been planning this moment carefully. I arrived at Romano's steakhouse that Tuesday evening knowing exactly what was about to unfold, but she thought she was testing my maturity and security as her future husband. "I really think this will strengthen our relationship," she had said 3 days earlier, her eyes bright with what I now recognized as guilt masquerading as enthusiasm. Julian suggested it during our coffee meeting when we were discussing healthy boundaries with exes. "He thinks you're probably intimidated by our history, and honestly, I agree." The irony wasn't lost on me that her affair partner was designing the very exercise meant to prove my trustworthiness. I had feigned reluctance, asking why we needed such an elaborate test after 3 years together, which only made her more insistent. "Because marriage is about complete transparency and trust," she'd explained, touching my arm with practiced sincerity. "If you can't handle having dinner with Julian while we discuss our past openly, how can I trust you with the bigger challenges we'll face as a married couple?" The manipulation was textbook, making me the problem that needed solving while positioning herself as the reasonable one seeking growth. I had agreed with apparent hesitation, watching her face light up with what she probably thought was victory but was actually relief that her plan was working. Julian arrived 15 minutes late, making his entrance with the kind of swagger that screamed overcompensation, all-expensive cologne and designer watch that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Sorry I'm late, traffic was insane," he announced, though I'd seen him sitting in his BMW in the parking lot for 20 minutes, probably rehearsing his performance. He embraced Veronica with familiarity that lingered just long enough to make his point, his hand resting on her lower back in a way that spoke of recent intimacy. "You must be the famous fiancé," he said, extending his hand with a grip designed to establish dominance. "Veronica talks about you constantly." The smile never reached his eyes, and I could see him cataloging everything about me, from my off-the-rack suit to my practical watch, filing away ammunition for later use. We ordered drinks, and Julian immediately took control of the conversation, launching into stories about his successful law practice, his recent vacation to Monaco, and his thoughts on what makes relationships work. "The thing about modern relationships," he said, swirling his $20 glass of scotch, "is that too many people settle for comfortable instead of passionate. They choose security over excitement, stability over chemistry." His eyes flicked to me with calculated timing. "Not everyone can handle being with someone who demands excellence, you know? Some people prefer the safe choice." Veronica laughed, that musical sound I used to love but now recognized as encouragement for his performance. "Julian always challenged me to be better," she said, her hand briefly touching his arm. "He never let me settle for mediocre anything, restaurants, experiences, even conversations. It was exhausting but exhilarating." The comparison was drawn with surgical precision, and I sat there absorbing every word while mentally reviewing the hidden recording devices I'd planted throughout my clothing. Julian continued his assault with the skill of a seasoned prosecutor, dissecting my career choice, questioning my ambitions, and subtly undermining everything from my taste in wine to my vacation preferences. "Accounting, right?" he said when Veronica mentioned my profession. "That must be steady." I imagine the excitement comes from finding new ways to organize spreadsheets. His laugh was rich with condescension. "Though I suppose someone has to handle the boring but necessary work while others take the real risks." When I mentioned my recent promotion, he nodded with patronizing approval. "Regional manager, impressive. Though I imagine the corporate ladder in accounting is more like a gentle ramp, safe, predictable, designed for people who prefer guarantees over challenges." Each comment was crafted to diminish me while elevating him, and Veronica's responses revealed the depth of their private conversations about my inadequacies. "Julian's always saying how important it is to push boundaries," she said during dessert, her eyes bright with wine and shared secrets. "He thinks most people, especially in relationships, get too comfortable and stop growing. They choose easy over meaningful." The evening reached its crescendo when Julian leaned back in his chair, studying me like a specimen under glass. "You know what I respect about you?" he said, his tone suggesting this would be anything but respectful. "You're exactly what Veronica needs right now, stable, predictable, completely non-threatening. After all the passion and intensity we shared, she probably craves something simpler. Someone who won't challenge her or demand she be her best self." He raised his glass in a mock toast. "Here's to men who know their place and don't try to be something they're not." Veronica's laughter rang through the restaurant, and she reached across to squeeze my hand with what felt like pity disguised as affection. "See? This is exactly what I was hoping for. You're handling this so maturely, showing Julian that you're confident enough in yourself and our relationship to hear these things without getting defensive or jealous." She beamed at me like I was a well-trained pet performing tricks. "You've earned my respect tonight by proving you can handle the truth about what real passion looks like." I sat in silence for a long moment, watching them both wait for my response, their faces flushed with wine and the thrill of their shared cruelty. The recording devices had captured everything perfectly, every laugh, every touch, every calculated insult designed to break down my self-worth while positioning Julian as the superior man. Instead of giving them the reaction they expected, I simply reached for my wallet, placed enough cash on the table to cover the entire expensive meal, and stood up without a word. "Where are you going?" Veronica asked, her confidence faltering for the first time all evening. "We're not finished talking." I looked down at her, then at Julian, committing their expressions to memory. "Actually we are," I said quietly. "Thank you both for a very educational evening." I walked out of Romano's steakhouse with my head high, leaving them sitting in confused silence, completely unaware that they had just provided me with everything I needed to destroy both their lives completely. 6 weeks earlier, I had been reviewing our joint credit card statements when I noticed charges that made my stomach drop like a stone. There was $847 at La Perla Lingerie Boutique on a Tuesday when Veronica claimed she was working late, $623 at the Ritz downtown during her supposed solo spa weekend, and multiple charges at Chez Laurent, a restaurant she swore she'd never heard of when I suggested it for our anniversary. I sat at my kitchen table with months of statements spread before me, my accountant's mind automatically calculating patterns that told a story I didn't want to believe. The charges painted a picture of secret dates, intimate gifts, and romantic getaways that had nothing to do with our relationship. What made it worse was the timing. Every suspicious charge coincided perfectly with evenings she claimed to be stressed about work or needed space to think about our future together. I had been funding her affair without knowing it, paying for the very activities that were destroying our relationship. My friend Tyler from college worked downtown and had an unfortunate habit of recognizing faces in crowds, which is how he accidentally shattered my remaining illusions about Veronica's faithfulness. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," he said during our monthly basketball game, his tone suggesting he absolutely was going to tell me anyway. "But I saw Veronica at the Peninsula Resort last weekend with some guy who definitely wasn't you. They were holding hands at the poolside bar, looking pretty cozy for business associates." He described Julian perfectly without knowing who he was, down to the expensive watch and the way he touched her lower back possessively. "Look, maybe there's an explanation," Tyler continued, though his expression suggested he didn't believe it either. "But they seemed really comfortable together, like they'd been doing this for a while. The guy was paying for everything with a corporate card, acting like he owned the place." The Peninsula Resort was where Veronica claimed she'd gone for a stress relief retreat, needing time alone to process the pressures of our upcoming wedding. She'd posted carefully cropped photos of spa treatments and sunset views, creating the illusion of solitude while actually documenting a romantic weekend with another man. I had even felt guilty for not being more supportive of her need for space, wondering if my own stress about the wedding planning was affecting her mental health. The irony was crushing. I'd been worried about being a better partner while she was literally in another man's arms. Instead of confronting her immediately like my emotions demanded, I forced myself to think strategically, knowing that accusations without proof would only lead to denials and cover-ups. I spent 3 days researching private investigators before hiring Rebecca Chen, a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases and came highly recommended by Tyler's divorce attorney friend. Most people want to confront immediately, Rebecca explained during our initial meeting. But if you want irrefutable evidence that can't be explained away or minimized, we need to be patient and methodical. Cheaters always think they're smarter than they are, and that overconfidence usually leads to mistakes. She was right about the overconfidence part. Within 2 weeks, Rebecca had photographic evidence of Veronica and Julian at 4 different locations, including a weekend trip to Napa Valley that Veronica claimed was a work conference for her marketing firm. The photos showed them kissing by a vineyard, holding hands while wine tasting, and entering the same hotel room at the luxury resort where corporate conferences definitely weren't being held. Rebecca's investigation revealed that Julian was using his law firm's expense account to fund these romantic getaways, categorizing them as client entertainment or business development trips. He's not just cheating on his wife, Rebecca explained, showing me financial records she'd obtained through legal channels. He's embezzling from his firm to pay for it. This guy's living a fantasy lifestyle funded by stolen money, and your fiancé is the primary beneficiary. The documentation was overwhelming: receipts, hotel records, credit card statements, and photographs that made their 6-month affair undeniable. But what hurt most was discovering how calculated and deliberate their deception had been, with Veronica creating elaborate cover stories while Julian provided the financial means to live out their romantic fantasy. I realized that every time she'd claimed to need space or felt overwhelmed by our relationship, she'd actually been planning her next secret rendezvous with him. The betrayal went deeper than simple infidelity. It was a complete reconstruction of reality designed to make me the problem while they pursued their affair without guilt or consequence. As I sat reviewing Rebecca's final report, I understood that confronting them directly would only result in tears, apologies, and promises to change that would mean nothing. They had spent months lying to my face with practiced ease, manipulating my emotions and exploiting my trust while building their secret relationship on my credit cards and his stolen money. Instead of giving them the opportunity to minimize or explain away their actions, I decided they deserved an audience for their performance, something memorable that would capture the true nature of their characters before I destroyed their lives completely. I spent the next 4 weeks conducting what I came to think of as psychological warfare, carefully planting seeds of insecurity about our relationship that would push Veronica towards suggesting exactly the kind of public confrontation I needed. My strategy was simple but effective: make her feel guilty enough about the affair that she'd overcompensate by trying to prove my trustworthiness instead of her own. I started with subtle comments about faithfulness and transparency, observing how each mention made her fidget with her engagement ring or change the subject abruptly. I was reading this article about couples who survive infidelity. I mentioned casually one evening while she scrolled through her phone, probably texting Julian. The ones who make it are always the ones who practice radical honesty from the beginning. No secrets, no hidden conversations, complete transparency about everything. Her head snapped up with suspicious speed, and I watched her face cycle through guilt, panic, and forced composure. "That's interesting," she said, her voice slightly higher than normal. "Though I think trust is more important than transparency. Some things are private, even in relationships." The irony of her defending privacy while conducting a secret affair was almost amusing, but I maintained my thoughtful expression while internally noting how quickly she'd revealed her defensive position. Over the following days, I continued this campaign with carefully calibrated comments about loyalty and commitment, always framing them as general observations rather than accusations. Tyler mentioned seeing couples do trust exercises to strengthen their relationships, I said during dinner at her favorite restaurant, the one Julian had been paying for with embezzled money. Apparently some therapists recommend controlled exposure to situations that might trigger jealousy or insecurity, kind of like exposure therapy for relationship anxiety. I watched her process this information, seeing the wheels turn as she considered how such an exercise might serve her own purposes. "That actually sounds really healthy," she replied, leaning forward with sudden interest. Most people avoid difficult conversations or situations that make them uncomfortable, but facing them together could build stronger foundations. She was already selling herself on the idea, and I could practically see her mental justification forming. If she could prove my trustworthiness through some elaborate test, it would somehow balance the scales of her own betrayal. The breakthrough came when I started expressing mild concern about her recent behavior changes, positioning myself as the worried fiancé rather than the suspicious one. "You seem different lately," I said one morning as she prepared for another secret meeting disguised as work obligations. "More confident, more social, like you're glowing with some kind of new energy. It's actually really attractive, but sometimes I wonder if I'm holding you back from being your best self." Her face lit up with what I now recognized as relief at being able to discuss her affair-fueled confidence without revealing its source. "I have been feeling more like myself recently," she admitted, unconsciously touching her neck where Julian had left marks she thought makeup had hidden. "Maybe it's just personal growth, or maybe I'm finally comfortable with who I am regardless of what other people think." The manipulation was working perfectly. She was interpreting her guilt-driven energy as empowerment while I positioned myself as potentially inadequate rather than betrayed. This dynamic pushed her toward wanting to prove something about our relationship, though she believed she was testing my security rather than her own loyalty. My strategy reached its culmination when I began researching relationship experts online, leaving browser history that she would inevitably discover during her typical evening phone snooping sessions. I bookmarked articles about trust-building exercises, highlighting sections about confronting past relationships and proving emotional maturity through controlled challenges. The breadcrumbs were too obvious to ignore, and within days she was casually bringing up concepts from those exact articles as if they were her own discoveries. "I've been thinking about what makes some couples stronger than others," she announced one evening, her tone suggesting this was a spontaneous realization rather than guided manipulation. "It seems like the most secure relationships are the ones where partners can handle discussing past relationships openly, without jealousy or possessiveness getting in the way." I feigned mild discomfort with the topic, knowing that my apparent reluctance would make her more determined to pursue it. "I don't know if I need to hear details about your ex-boyfriends," I said, watching her face brighten with the thrill of having found my supposed weakness. "Some things are better left in the past, don't you think?" This response was exactly what she needed to justify her next move, positioning my imaginary insecurity as the problem that required solving through exposure therapy. She spent the following week researching trust exercises online, eventually discovering articles about couples who strengthened their relationships by having open conversations with former partners in controlled settings. "What if we tried something really bold?" she suggested with practiced casualness, though I could see the excitement building behind her eyes. "What if you had dinner with Julian and me, just to prove that we're all mature adults who can handle complex relationships without drama or jealousy?" I let her believe the idea was entirely hers, expressing reluctance that gradually gave way to grudging acceptance as she outlined the benefits of such an exercise. She painted it as the ultimate test of my emotional security and our relationship strength, never realizing she was designing her own public humiliation while I prepared to document every moment of their cruel performance for the audience that would ultimately matter most. The evening of the dinner, I arrived at Romano's equipped with surveillance technology that would have impressed a professional spy, all borrowed from my security consultant friend Marcus, who specialized in corporate espionage prevention. I wore a pen camera disguised as an expensive Mont Blanc that recorded in 4K resolution, cufflinks with built-in microphones sensitive enough to capture whispered conversations across a table, and a smartphone app that live-streamed everything to a secure cloud server with automatic backup systems. Marcus had insisted on military-grade equipment after I explained the situation, claiming this was the most justified surveillance operation he'd ever assisted with in 15 years of catching corporate thieves and cheating spouses. "These devices are used by federal investigators," he explained while helping me test the equipment. "Crystal clear video, perfect audio quality, and completely undetectable unless someone knows exactly what to look for. Just remember to keep the pen positioned naturally and avoid touching the cufflinks too much." The technology was so advanced that I could monitor the live feed from my watch, ensuring perfect angles and audio levels throughout the dinner while appearing completely focused on the conversation. In preparation for the evening, I had spent hours researching Julian's background through public records, social media profiles, and professional databases, discovering information that painted a picture of systematic deception spanning multiple areas of his life. He wasn't just cheating on his wife Claire, who happened to be a prominent family court judge known for her harsh sentences against unfaithful spouses, but was also involved in embezzling company funds to finance his lavish lifestyle with multiple women besides Veronica. His Instagram showed expensive vacations and luxury purchases that far exceeded his legitimate income as a mid-level associate at a prestigious law firm, and Rebecca's investigation had revealed at least 3 other women he was simultaneously pursuing with similar romantic promises and financial manipulation. The man was running what essentially amounted to a fraud operation, using stolen money to maintain relationships with women who believed they were his only affair partner, each one convinced she was special enough to justify his betrayal of his marriage and career. During the dinner itself, I employed subtle interrogation techniques learned from detective shows and true crime podcasts, expertly baiting Julian into revealing intimate details about his relationship with Veronica while he thought he was simply humiliating me. "You two seem to have a special connection," I said with apparent admiration, watching him preen at what he interpreted as acknowledgement of his superiority. "Veronica mentions how much she values your friendship and professional advice. It must be nice having someone who understands the complexities of ambitious careers." This opening gave him permission to elaborate on their relationship dynamics, and his arrogance made him boastful about aspects that would be devastating when played back to the wrong audiences. "Veronica's always been drawn to men who challenge her intellectually," he replied, his hand briefly touching hers in a gesture of possession. "She needs someone who can match her energy, who understands that extraordinary women require extraordinary experiences. Most guys settle for ordinary relationships because they're intimidated by what real passion actually demands." I nodded thoughtfully while internally celebrating how perfectly he was incriminating himself. "That makes sense. She does seem more vibrant lately, more confident and self-assured. I imagine having a mentor like you helps her see possibilities she might not have considered otherwise." Julian's ego couldn't resist the flattery, and he launched into detailed descriptions of their private conversations about relationships, careers, and what he called settling versus thriving. He revealed specific dates when they discussed my inadequacies, locations where they'd met for what he termed life coaching sessions, and his philosophy about helping ambitious women recognize when they were compromising their potential for security. "Take last month's trip to Napa Valley," he said, apparently forgetting that Veronica had told me she was at a work conference. "We spent the entire weekend discussing her career trajectory and personal growth goals. She realized that sometimes the safe choice isn't the right choice, that real fulfillment requires taking risks most people aren't brave enough to take." Veronica's face glowed with remembered pleasure, and she added her own details about their weekend discussions, completely unaware that she was providing evidence of their affair to a hidden audience. "Julian helped me understand that I was limiting myself by focusing too much on traditional relationship expectations instead of authentic personal development," she said, her voice warm with what she probably thought was philosophical insight rather than justification for adultery. The conversation continued in this vein for over an hour, with Julian becoming increasingly explicit about their intimate connection while positioning it as enlightened mentorship rather than betrayal. "Some women need to experience real passion before they can appreciate what they actually deserve," he said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a seductive tone. "Veronica's learning to value excitement over stability, inspiration over predictability. It's beautiful watching someone discover their true self through authentic connection." He described their physical relationship in barely coded language, boasting about training her in ways her conventional fiancé could never understand, completely oblivious to the fact that every word was being recorded in crystal clear quality for future broadcast to everyone who mattered in their lives. His arrogance was so complete that he actually thanked me for being mature enough to facilitate their friendship, claiming that my willingness to share Veronica's attention proved I understood what was best for her development as a person. By the end of the evening, I had captured nearly 2 hours of them celebrating their affair, mocking our relationship, and revealing details that would destroy both their marriage and his career when presented to the appropriate authorities, all while they believed they were simply educating me about my own inadequacies as a romantic partner. After leaving Romano's steakhouse, I spent the entire night in my home office conducting deep research into both Veronica's and Julian's vulnerabilities, determining exactly where to strike for maximum devastation with minimal legal complications for myself. I discovered that Julian's wife Claire wasn't just any family court judge, but specifically one whose reputation for harsh sentences against cheating spouses had made her a local legend among divorce attorneys who warned their clients about drawing her as their presiding judge. Her most famous case involved awarding a betrayed wife 90% of marital assets after her husband's affair, and she'd written several legal articles about treating adultery as financial abuse when joint resources were used to fund extramarital relationships. The irony was perfect. Julian had chosen to cheat on the one woman in the city who had built her career on punishing exactly his type of behavior, and he'd been stupid enough to use company money to do it. Claire's professional reputation was built on the principle that cheating spouses deserved complete financial destruction, and discovering her husband's embezzlement-funded affairs would trigger both personal fury and professional obligation to ensure he faced criminal charges rather than just divorce proceedings. I found that Veronica's family situation was equally vulnerable to public scandal, since her parents owned a chain of Christian bookstores called Faithful Words, and had recently made her their primary spokesperson for community outreach programs targeting young families and engaged couples. Their business model depended entirely on their reputation as moral authorities in the religious community, with Veronica frequently appearing at church events discussing the importance of fidelity, commitment, and Christian values in modern relationships. The hypocrisy of their adultery spokesperson conducting a secret affair would destroy not only their family relationships but potentially bankrupt the business that employed her 3 siblings and supported her elderly grandparents. Her parents had invested their entire life savings into expanding the bookstore chain, borrowing heavily against their retirement accounts to open 2 new locations specifically because Veronica's engagement had made her such an effective spokesperson for traditional family values. Using the restaurant footage as a foundation, I spent hours carefully editing together a comprehensive video presentation that combined the dinner conversation with earlier surveillance evidence Rebecca had gathered, creating an undeniable timeline of their 6-month affair complete with financial records proving Julian's embezzlement. The editing process was meticulous. I synchronized audio from the hidden microphones with video from multiple angles, added timestamps showing the progression of their relationship, and included documentation of every hotel visit, restaurant charge, and luxury purchase funded by stolen company money. The final product was a devastating 40-minute presentation that told the complete story of their betrayal, from their first secret meeting through their elaborate deception campaign, culminating in their cruel performance at Romano's where they celebrated humiliating me while planning their future together. I also researched Julian's law firm extensively and discovered they were already under investigation by the State Bar Association for financial irregularities, making my evidence the final piece that would trigger criminal charges rather than just professional discipline. His embezzlement had been systematic and extensive, with over $60,000 diverted to fund his multiple affairs through fake client entertainment expenses and fraudulent business development claims. The firm's senior partners were already facing scrutiny from regulatory agencies, and discovering that one of their associates had been stealing money to fund extramarital affairs would force them to cooperate fully with prosecutors to minimize their own liability. My evidence would transform their internal audit into a federal investigation, ensuring Julian faced prison time rather than just disbarment. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The firm was desperate to prove their commitment to ethical behavior, and Julian's documented embezzlement provided them with the perfect scapegoat to demonstrate their zero-tolerance policy for financial misconduct. I realized that by morning, I would hold enough evidence to destroy not just their relationship, but their careers, family relationships, social standing, and financial security completely, all while maintaining my own legal protection since everything had been obtained through legitimate surveillance methods. The restaurant dinner had been the final performance in their elaborate deception, and they had unknowingly provided me with the tools to ensure that performance would be their last act together before facing the consequences of 6 months of betrayal, theft, and calculated cruelty designed to exploit my loyalty while building their fantasy relationship on stolen money and manipulated emotions. At exactly 3 a.m., I began the systematic destruction of their lives by simultaneously sending the comprehensive evidence package to 12 carefully selected recipients, each chosen for maximum impact and legal protection for my actions. The distribution list included Judge Claire with a cover letter explaining how her husband had used embezzled funds to conduct his affair, Veronica's parents and 3 siblings with documentation showing how their family spokesperson had been conducting a secret relationship while promoting Christian values, Julian's law firm partners with proof of his systematic embezzlement, the State Bar Association investigators already examining the firm's financial practices, and key members of their social circle including the wedding photographer, venue coordinator, and caterer who had received substantial deposits for our upcoming ceremony. Each recipient received a customized presentation focusing on the aspects most relevant to their relationship with Julian or Veronica, ensuring maximum emotional and professional impact while maintaining my legal protection through documented evidence rather than accusations or speculation. Judge Claire's package included specific financial records showing how Julian had categorized their romantic getaways as client entertainment, complete with receipts from the Peninsula Resort during Veronica's supposed stress retreat and itemized bills from romantic dinners charged to his corporate account as business development expenses. I also included audio clips from the restaurant dinner where Julian boasted about training Veronica and helping her recognize that she deserved better than conventional relationships, knowing that Claire's professional experience with cheating spouses would make her understand exactly what those euphemisms meant. The evidence was so comprehensive that it would trigger both divorce proceedings and criminal referrals, since using company money to fund affairs constituted embezzlement regardless of Julian's intention to eventually reimburse the firm. While the emails were sending, I changed all my passwords, transferred our joint savings account back to my personal checking account, canceled the credit cards that had been funding their secret relationship, and arranged for a professional moving company to pack Veronica's belongings and transport them to a storage unit I'd rented in her name. By dawn, every trace of her presence had been removed from my apartment and placed in a climate-controlled facility with the first month's rent paid in advance and a key mailed to her parents' address. I also canceled our wedding venue, photographer, and catering contracts, forfeiting the deposits but saving myself from the humiliation of calling off a wedding publicly when the evidence of her affair became widespread knowledge in our social circle. Julian called at 6:47 a.m., his voice cracking with panic and desperation as he delivered news that exceeded even my expectations for immediate consequences. "She's filed for divorce and reported everything to the prosecutors," he sobbed, apparently calling from his car since I could hear traffic in the background. Claire saw the videos and called her attorney before she even finished watching them. "She's demanding criminal charges for the embezzlement and threatening to use her connections to ensure I get maximum sentences for everything." His voice broke completely as he described how Judge Claire had not only filed for divorce but had also reported his embezzlement to the State Bar Association and criminal prosecutors, using her professional network to ensure the case received priority attention from investigators who specialized in white-collar crime. She said the videos prove systematic financial abuse of our marriage and that using stolen money to fund affairs represents a pattern of criminal behavior that requires prosecution to protect other potential victims. I listened to his breakdown with clinical detachment, occasionally making sympathetic sounds while internally celebrating how perfectly my plan was executing. "The law firm fired me this morning and froze all my accounts while they conduct a complete audit of my client expense reports," he continued through increasingly hysterical sobs. "They're threatening to sue me personally for restitution and cooperating fully with the prosecutors to minimize their own liability. My entire career is over, and I'm probably going to prison because of those fucking recordings." Veronica's parents had seen the restaurant footage and were apparently threatening to disown her unless she entered a religious rehabilitation program and resigned from her position as family spokesperson immediately. Her dad called me screaming about how I'd corrupted his daughter and destroyed their family business, Julian reported through tears. "They're demanding she repay the $50,000 they gave her for wedding expenses and cutting off all financial support until she proves she's committed to redemption through their church counseling program." The religious community that had embraced Veronica as a spokesperson for traditional values was already spreading word about her hypocrisy, with several church leaders canceling her scheduled speaking engagements and demanding refunds for events where she'd been paid to discuss the importance of fidelity in Christian relationships. I calmly informed Julian that he had simply received the audience he seemed to crave for his performance at Romano's, pointing out that his boastful confessions about their affair had been delivered with enthusiasm and pride rather than shame or regret. "You both seemed so happy to share your story," I said with practiced innocence. "I just made sure the right people got to hear how passionate and authentic your connection really was." When he demanded to know how I'd obtained the recordings, I explained that I'd simply documented a dinner conversation he'd participated in willingly, noting that everything captured had been said proudly and publicly in a restaurant setting where anyone could have overheard their celebration of adultery and embezzlement. Within 48 hours, the consequences had exceeded my wildest expectations as both Julian and Veronica's lives collapsed in spectacular fashion that made local news and became cautionary tales in their respective professional communities. Julian was arrested for embezzlement during a dramatic scene outside his apartment complex, with news cameras capturing him being led away in handcuffs while Judge Claire stood on their front porch announcing her intention to pursue maximum criminal penalties for what she termed the systematic theft of marital assets to fund extramarital relationships. The local newspaper picked up the story as a perfect example of poetic justice, featuring a front-page article titled, "Judge's Husband Arrested for Embezzling Affair Funds," that included quotes from Claire about how she planned to use this case to establish legal precedents for treating adultery-related embezzlement as aggravated financial abuse. Julian's disbarment proceedings moved with unprecedented speed, since the State Bar Association was eager to demonstrate their commitment to ethical enforcement following recent scandals involving other firms, and his documented theft of client funds provided them with an ironclad case that required minimal investigation. The law firm released a public statement distancing themselves from his actions while announcing full cooperation with federal investigators and their commitment to restituting any clients who had been affected by his fraudulent expense reporting. Veronica's situation proved equally devastating as her parents followed through on their threats by demanding her immediate resignation from the family business and requiring her to repay the $50,000 in wedding expenses they'd provided, money she didn't have since her lifestyle had been entirely subsidized by my income and Julian's stolen funds. The Christian bookstore chain issued a public apology for her role as their spokesperson, announcing new policies for vetting future representatives and distancing themselves from what they called the moral failings that contradict our fundamental values. Her scheduled speaking engagements at churches throughout the region were canceled, with several pastors publicly condemning her behavior as evidence of how modern society corrupts traditional values, and her social media accounts were flooded with comments from disappointed community members who felt personally betrayed by her hypocrisy. The religious rehabilitation program her parents demanded was a 6-month residential facility that would require her to surrender her phone, social media access, and contact with anyone from her previous life while undergoing intensive counseling designed to address what they termed moral corruption and materialistic values. Our mutual friends sided overwhelmingly with me after seeing the undeniable video evidence, with several admitting they had suspected something but never knew how to approach the subject without proof. My phone filled with supportive messages from people expressing admiration for my strategic handling of the situation and offering business opportunities, social invitations, and introductions to single women who were impressed by what they called my mature response to betrayal. The wedding vendors who had received the evidence videos thanked me for the advance notice and expressed sympathy for my situation, with several offering to transfer my deposits to future events or providing referrals to other clients who appreciated vendors with integrity. The contrast between their public humiliation and my growing social support created a narrative that resonated throughout our community, establishing me as the dignified victim who had handled betrayal with class while they faced consequences for behavior that everyone agreed was inexcusable. I spent the following weeks renovating my apartment to remove all traces of Veronica's influence and create a space that reflected my true personality rather than the compromises I had made during our relationship, installing a home office with state-of-the-art technology, upgrading the kitchen with professional-grade appliances, and creating an entertainment area designed for hosting friends rather than impressing a woman who had never appreciated my efforts anyway. The financial freedom from no longer subsidizing her lifestyle allowed me to invest in improvements I had postponed for years, and I discovered that my apartment became a popular gathering place for friends who admitted they had always felt uncomfortable during the Veronica era when conversation topics were restricted to subjects that wouldn't trigger her jealousy or boredom. My career also benefited from the situation as colleagues and clients who learned about my strategic response began viewing me as someone with exceptional analytical skills and emotional intelligence, leading to consulting opportunities and partnership discussions that had never materialized while I was distracted by relationship drama. The private investigator Rebecca sent referrals from other clients who were impressed by the thoroughness of our evidence gathering, and my security consultant friend Marcus offered me a part-time position helping other betrayed spouses document infidelity for legal purposes. 6 months later, I received an invitation to Julian's sentencing hearing where Judge Claire planned to deliver a statement about the impact of his crimes on both their marriage and the legal profession's reputation for integrity. Veronica was reportedly still in the religious rehabilitation program, having been deemed unsuitable for early release due to what counselors described as persistent materialism and insufficient spiritual growth, while her family business struggled with bankruptcy proceedings triggered by the loss of their primary spokesperson and the community boycotts that followed her scandal. I declined the invitation to attend Julian's sentencing, choosing instead to spend that day moving into the house I had purchased with the money I was no longer spending on someone else's fantasy lifestyle, finally free from what I now recognized had been an elaborate manipulation designed to exploit my loyalty, financial stability, and genuine desire for commitment while they built their secret relationship on stolen money and calculated deception that would have continued indefinitely if I hadn't discovered their betrayal and responded with the strategic patience they deserved.